The mysterious discovery. The silence of space was broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Captain Zara stood by the control panel, eyes scanning the endless dark void outside. The distant stars twinkled, cold and indifferent. She had seen many missions in her years as a commander, but this one was different. This time, they were searching for something that didn't belong in the universe, a mysterious signal that had been detected from an uncharted corner of space. The team, a group of elite explorers, had received the strange signal a few days ago. It wasn't like anything they had encountered before. It was faint at first, a small whisper amidst the noise of space, but it had been growing stronger with each passing hour. The coordinates had led them to this area, far from any known planets or star systems. The signal was unlike anything the advanced equipment aboard their ship had ever picked up. "What do we have, Zara?" Lieutenant Maiko's voice broke the silence. She was standing beside Zara, eyes glued to the holographic display. A 3D map of the star system floated in front of them. The signal's source was located on a small, desolate moon orbiting a gas giant. Zara hesitated for a moment before answering. "Something's not right. The signal's coming from that moon, but there's no known life out here. No previous records of any civilization." She tapped the control panel, zooming in on the moon. It was barren, with no visible features except for a few craters scattered across its surface. The crew remained quiet, the weight of the unknown heavy in the air. Every time they thought they had found something important, it turned out to be nothing more than a false alarm. But this signal, this one felt different. It wasn't just a random anomaly. There was something deliberate about it. "Prepare for landing," Zara ordered. "We're going down. Make sure everyone's suited up." Within moments, the crew had gathered in the landing bay, their boots clicking on the metal floor as they rushed to their positions. Zara looked over her team. Maiko, the sharp-minded lieutenant; Kale, the young and eager engineer; Dr. Lin, the scientist with a passion for alien biology; and Van, the quiet but reliable pilot. They were a skilled team, and Zara trusted them all with her life. The shuttle descended toward the moon's surface, the engines rumbling softly as it cut through the thin atmosphere. Outside, the moon appeared as a desolate wasteland, a place where nothing had ever lived. Zara could feel the tension rising among the crew. They had no idea what awaited them. As the shuttle touched down with a soft thud, the airlock hissed open, and the crew disembarked, stepping onto the dusty, gray surface of the moon. It was cold here, the temperature far lower than Earth's harshest winters. Yet, despite the emptiness, there was something oddly compelling about the place. It felt as though the ground itself was hiding something important. Dr. Lin was the first to speak. "The signal's coming from beneath the surface," she said, her voice filled with awe. "There's no way it's natural. It's too precise." The team began moving toward the source of the signal, which was coming from a large crater about a mile away. Zara led the way, her boots crunching against the moon's surface as she scanned their surroundings. The wind was a low howl, but the sound was muffled in the airless atmosphere. Their movements were slow, cautious, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. When they reached the crater, Zara stopped. At the center of it was an opening, an ancient entrance covered by layers of dust and debris. It looked like a massive stone doorway, something constructed rather than naturally formed. The air around it felt charged, as though something was waiting, watching. The signal was growing louder, and it was clear now that they had found something monumental. Miko approached the entrance first, kneeling down to examine the markings on the door. "These symbols, they're not like anything we've ever seen before," she muttered. The symbols were intricate, alien, and completely unfamiliar. "We need to get inside," Zara said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. "Let's open it." Kale, the engineer, stepped forward with his tools. He worked quickly, using his scanner to unlock the mechanisms built into the stone. As the doors slowly creaked open, a rush of stale, cold air escaped, as if the place had been sealed for centuries. Inside, the team stepped cautiously into the dark, the only light coming from their suits' headlamps. The walls were covered in more alien symbols, and the air was thick with dust and the scent of something ancient. As they ventured deeper, they found something unexpected. An object in the center of the room, buried under a thick layer of dust. It was a book, a thick, leather-bound book, unlike anything the team had seen before. The cover was adorned with more symbols, these ones almost glowing in the faint light. It radiated a strange energy, a hum that seemed to echo in the back of Zora's mind. Zora carefully approached the book, her gloved hands trembling as she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers made contact with the cover, the hum grew louder. The book opened on its own, revealing pages filled with intricate writing that seemed to shimmer and shift before their eyes. Dr. Lin gasped. "This is it. This is the diary of the alien diplomat." Zora's heart skipped a beat. This discovery could change everything. It could reveal secrets about the galaxy, about humanity's place in the universe. But there was also something else, something that nagged at the back of her mind. The book wasn't just a record, it was a warning. And they had just unlocked the first page. The alien diplomat's diary. The air inside the ancient chamber felt thicker now, heavier, as if something unseen was shifting. Zora's fingers hovered over the opened pages of the alien diplomat's diary. The words on the pages weren't in any language they had ever encountered, but something about them felt oddly familiar. The symbols seemed to pulse, almost as if they were alive, and Zora felt a strange connection to them, as if they were beckoning her to understand their meaning. Dr. Lin stepped closer, her eyes wide with wonder. This is beyond anything we studied. It's more than a language. It's a record of events, a history, written by an alien species. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, still in disbelief at the enormity of their discovery. Zora nodded but didn't respond. She was lost in the flickering lights coming from the pages. The room was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the book. She could almost hear a voice in her head, whispering fragments of words, a voice that seemed to come from another time. There was a warning here, she could feel it. "We need to know what this says," Maiko said, breaking the silence. "This could be our key to understanding who the aliens are, what they want. If we decipher this, it could change everything." Zora agreed, but there was a sense of unease creeping in. She didn't trust this book. It felt wrong. Like opening it had unleashed something that shouldn't have been touched. But they had come so far. They couldn't turn back now. She motioned for Dr. Lin to take a closer look. Dr. Lin opened her scanning device and pointed it at the page. A holographic display flickered into existence above the book, showing the strange alien script. "I can try to translate it, but this might take time," she said, her voice steady, but filled with anticipation. "We might need to focus on the larger patterns before we can fully understand it." Zora glanced around the room, her instincts on high alert. The chamber felt more oppressive now. The walls seemed to close in, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Her team was too focused on the book to notice, but Zora couldn't ignore the nagging sense of something moving just beyond their sight. "I think we should be careful," Zora muttered, her eyes darting around the room. "Something feels off." Van, the quiet pilot, looked up from the controls he had been checking. "We should set up a perimeter, keep watch, just in case." Zora nodded in agreement. "Good idea, Van. Maiko, Kale, stay with Dr. Lin. Keep working on the translation. I'll go check the outside perimeter." The team split up, but as Zora stepped toward the exit, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The sound of her boots on the dusty floor echoed in the emptiness of the chamber. It was so quiet, too quiet. Zora stepped outside, breathing in the cold, thin air of the moon's surface. The wind had picked up, a soft howl sweeping across the barren landscape. Her eyes scanned the dark horizon, but there was nothing there. No movement, no life, just the bleak, lifeless expanse. She shook her head and turned back toward the chamber. But as she did, she heard something, a faint whisper on the wind, a voice, distant and unintelligible, like the remnants of a long-forgotten language. She froze, straining to listen, but the voice faded before she could make out anything. Her heart raced as she hurried back to the group, the feeling of unease growing stronger with every step. When she entered the chamber again, the team was still gathered around the book. Dr. Lin was speaking, her words urgent. It's not just a diary," Dr. Lin said, her voice trembling. "It's a record of a treaty, a peace treaty. But something went wrong. There's mention of a conflict, a war, a warning." Zara's blood ran cold. The words war and conflict echoed in her mind. She couldn't help but feel that they had just stumbled into something far bigger than they had anticipated. "A war?" Zara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Dr. Lin replied, her face pale. "But it's not just any war. This diary details the final moments of an alien diplomat, someone who was trying to broker peace between two warring factions. But the treaty, it was never completed. There was an event, a betrayal." Zara's mind raced. A peace treaty, a war, betrayal. She couldn't make sense of it. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about diplomacy. The fate of these alien civilizations, and possibly humanity, was tied to the secrets hidden in this book. As the team continued to study the diary, Zora's eyes returned to the pages. The writing seemed to shift, as if the book itself was reacting to the attention. It was almost as though it was alive, watching them, waiting for something. Suddenly, there was a loud noise from the entrance of the chamber. Zara's head snapped toward the door. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she saw a shadow move in the doorway. The team tensed, each of them reaching for their weapons. Something was here. And it wasn't just a piece of ancient history. The alien diplomat's diary had just opened a door to something much darker. The silent warning. The air inside the chamber grew colder, as if the very walls were closing in on them. Zora could feel it now, the undeniable sense that they weren't alone. The ancient structure around them had been silent for centuries, yet now it seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though it was alive and aware of their presence. The diary had done something to stir it, and Zora couldn't shake the feeling that their every move was being watched. "Did you hear that?" Van whispered, his voice tense. He was still at the door, keeping watch over the outside perimeter, but his eyes darted nervously toward the group. His hand rested near his weapon, ready for whatever might come. Zara's gaze swept the room, her instincts telling her something was wrong. The shadows in the corners of the chamber seemed to move, stretching and shifting as if they had a life of their own. But it was the whispers that unsettled her the most, the same unintelligible murmur from outside the chamber. Now they were louder, almost like a chant, echoing in her mind. "No, I didn't hear anything," Zara said, though her voice trembled slightly. The unease in her chest tightened. "But keep your guard up. Something feels off." As they continued to examine the diary, Dr. Lin's hand shook as she worked her scanning device over the alien text. The patterns were slowly beginning to form a recognizable structure, but nothing could prepare them for what was coming next. The diary wasn't just a record of past events. It was a warning. A warning that the peace treaty had been violated, and that the alien factions that had been in conflict were on the verge of war again. Dr. Lin took a step back, her face pale. This isn't just a record. It's a cry for help. The diplomat was trying to stop a war, but the treaty failed. And now, whoever is left from these factions, they want to finish what was started. "What do you mean, finish?" Maiko asked, his voice growing more anxious. "What's happening? Who are these factions?" Dr. Lin's eyes met Zara's. "I don't know for sure, but there's talk of a catastrophic event, an extinction-level war between these two alien species, and it seems like they've been waiting for something, or someone." The room fell silent as the gravity of her words sank in. Zara felt her heart race as the pieces of the puzzle slowly began to click together. They had discovered more than just an alien diary. This was a message, a call for help from someone who had failed to stop a war, someone who had witnessed the destruction firsthand. And now the very thing they had uncovered could be the key to the conflict starting all over again. Zara turned toward the team, her voice steady but filled with urgency. We need to finish reading this. Every word, every detail. If there's any chance we can stop whatever is about to happen, we have to know what this diplomat knew. Maiko nodded, his face determined. Let's get to work. If there's anything that can help us stop this war, we can't waste any time. But as they refocused on the diary, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that their time was running out. The whispers grew louder in her ears, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to draw closer, as if something was waiting just outside of their view. The coldness in the air deepened, and Zara's breath fogged up in front of her. Something was watching them. Something that didn't want them to uncover the truth. The once quiet chamber now felt like a prison, the walls pressing in around them as they tried to decipher the alien diplomat's final messages. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. It was subtle at first, like a minor glitch in the power grid. But the flickering grew more erratic, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. Zara pulled her jacket tighter around her as she exchanged a nervous glance with Van, who was still positioned by the door. Something's wrong, Zara said, her voice tense. We need to finish the translation, now. But as Dr. Lin continued to work on the diary, something unexpected happened. The text on the pages seemed to shift, the symbols rearranging themselves, as if the book was responding to their actions. The diary was no longer passive, it was alive. It was actively interacting with them. And as the final translation began to reveal itself, Zara realized the terrifying truth. The alien diplomat had not just failed to stop the war, he had been part of it. The treaty was a ruse, and the so-called peacekeepers were now preparing for the final stage of a war that had been waged in the shadows for centuries. They're coming, Dr. Lin whispered, her voice filled with dread. Zara's heart stopped. The whispers from the diary now filled the room, growing louder and louder. The shadows in the corners of the chamber seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Zara reached for her weapon, but before she could draw it, the door to the chamber slammed shut, trapping them inside. We're not alone, Zara said, her voice barely a whisper. And with that, the reality of their situation became clear. They were now caught in the middle of an ancient war. The alien factions were already on their way, and the battle for survival was about to begin. As the walls began to tremble and the air grew thick with tension, Zara could only hope that they had enough time to finish the diary's warnings before it was too late. The war begins. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as the chamber trembled. The walls shook violently, and dust cascaded from the ceiling. The air felt heavy with a growing presence. Something was coming. She gripped her weapon tightly, her mind racing. Outside, the whispers had turned into a full-on chorus, rising and falling in an eerie cadence. It was as if the very universe was calling them to battle. Get ready, Zara said, her voice sharp. Whatever is out there, we need to face it head-on. We can't let fear control us. Van stood next to her, his eyes scanning the doorway, every muscle tensed. Maiko was already at the other side of the room, frantically trying to re-engage the power to their communication systems, but the signals were weak. The alien structures had disrupted their tech in ways they couldn't understand. The signals, they're blocked, Maiko muttered under his breath, frustration clear in his voice. We're cut off from the outside. If we don't stop whatever's coming, we're stuck here. Zara's mind raced as she considered their options. She thought back to what they had learned from the diary. The diplomat had warned of an inevitable war, a war between two alien factions that would obliterate everything in its path. The treaty they had uncovered was no peace offering. It was a thinly veiled trap, set up by those who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, that moment had arrived. As the tremors intensified, Zara's instincts kicked in. They had to leave the chamber before whatever was coming arrived. but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked, bolted shut by an unseen force. The chamber seemed to be fighting against them, and there was no way to escape. "We're trapped," Van shouted, pounding on the door in desperation. "This can't be happening. We need to get out now." Zara took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. There had to be a way out. She glanced at the walls, noticing the strange symbols that glowed faintly as if they were alive. She had seen them before in the diary. Could they be part of the key to unlocking the door? "Dr. Lin," Zara called, her voice tight with urgency. "You're the one who understood the text. Can you find anything that might help us escape?" Dr. Lin, who had been standing frozen in place for what seemed like an eternity, snapped out of her trance and rushed to Zora's side. She studied the symbols on the walls closely, her fingers tracing the lines of the alien text. Then her eyes widened. "These symbols, they're not just writing," she said, her voice breathless. "They're part of a mechanism. I think the chamber itself is alive, reacting to the diary's words. It's responding to the war." Zara frowned, trying to comprehend the complexity of the situation. "Are you saying that the chamber is locking us in because of the war that's coming?" Dr. Lin nodded grimly. "Yes. The treaty, the war, it's all connected. The chamber is trying to prevent us from leaving. But we need to get out, or we'll be caught in the middle of something far worse than we can imagine." Maiko, still struggling with the technology, turned to them with a glint of determination in his eyes. "There's one last thing we can try," he said, his voice steady. "I may not have full access, but I can rewire the chamber's control system. We might be able to override the lockdown." Zara didn't hesitate. "Do it. Now." As Maiko worked furiously, Zara stood watch, her senses on high alert. The whispers outside had grown louder, more urgent, and she knew time was running out. Whatever was coming, whether it was the alien factions or something even worse, they weren't far behind. Just as Maiko finished his adjustments, a loud bang echoed through the chamber, and the door's lock released with a sharp click. The tension in the air lifted slightly as the door slowly creaked open, revealing the dark passageway beyond. But the relief was short-lived. From the depths of the darkened hallway came a guttural growl, low and menacing. Zara's heart skipped a beat as she glanced back at her team, her eyes wide with disbelief. The creature that emerged from the shadows was not like anything they had seen before. It was a towering, grotesque figure, half human, half machine. Its eyes glowed with a fierce, unnatural light, and its movements were swift, predatory. It was a warrior, and it was hunting them. "No time to waste," Zara shouted, grabbing Maiko by the arm and pulling him toward the doorway. "We need to move. Now." The team bolted through the door, the alien creature hot on their heels. Zara led the way, her thoughts racing. The war had already begun, and they had become its unwilling participants. They were in a race against time, not just to survive, but to stop the devastation that was about to unfold. As they ran down the narrow corridor, Zora couldn't shake the feeling that the war was more than just a battle of strength. There was something deeper at play, something far more dangerous. The alien factions weren't just fighting for control, they were fighting for the future of the universe itself. And Zara knew that their discovery, the Diplomat's diary, was the key to stopping it. But the cost would be high, and the consequences of failure unimaginable. Ahead, the corridor split into two paths. Without hesitation, Zara led her team down the left tunnel, where the faintest glimmer of light shone from the distance. The creature's growls echoed behind them, and the battle for survival had truly begun. But Zara couldn't shake the thought. Could they stop the war, or would they become just another casualty in the conflict? The alien warrior. The metallic clang of Zara's boots echoed in the narrow, dimly lit corridor as the team sprinted down the passageway, the sound of the alien warrior's growls growing louder behind them. The creature was relentless, its heavy footsteps vibrating through the floor, shaking their very bones. Zara's pulse raced as she led the group, heart pounding in her chest. They couldn't outrun the creature forever. This wasn't just any alien. It was a hunter designed to chase and kill. "We need to find a way to stop it," Van panted, his voice tight with fear. "We can't keep running like this." Zara glanced over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of the creature's glowing red eyes in the shadows. It was getting closer. They had to act, and fast. "Dr. Lin, any ideas?" Zara shouted, her voice cutting through the rush of their footsteps. Dr. Lin, who had been keeping pace behind them, looked ahead, scanning the walls as if searching for something. Her face was pale, but her mind was sharp. "There must be a weakness in its design," she muttered. "If I can find its core, where the systems are controlled, I can try to disable it." Miko, who had been keeping a tight grip on the team's communication devices, nodded. "We need to buy some time. If we can trap it or slow it down, we might have a chance." The corridor twisted ahead, curving sharply to the left. Zara's mind raced, weighing their options. It was clear that this creature wasn't just an ordinary soldier. Its hulking, cybernetic body was built for destruction, but that also meant it likely had vulnerabilities. Every machine did. "Van, Miko, find anything we can use as cover or a weapon," Zara commanded. "Dr. Lin, stay close to me. We need to find a place to fight back." The team spread out as they moved through the tunnel, searching for anything that could give them an edge. Zara's eyes scanned the walls. The alien architecture around them was strange, organic yet mechanical, like it had been built to adapt and grow. But she knew that this environment wasn't on their side. It was on the creatures. She suddenly stopped, holding up a hand to signal the team. There was a small chamber ahead, its entrance covered in vines and tendrils. A part of the structure seemed to have collapsed, creating a natural barrier. If they could trap the alien warrior inside, they might be able to slow it down long enough to make their escape. "Over here," Zara shouted, rushing to the entrance. "This way." The team quickly followed her, their pace quickening as the distant thud of the creature's footsteps grew louder. They'd barely had time to reach the entrance before the alien warrior emerged into view, its eyes glowing brighter as it locked onto them. It was fast, too fast. Zara felt the ground shake beneath them as the creature lunged toward them, its massive, cybernetic arms reaching out to grab. But Zara was already ahead of it. She sprinted into the small chamber, motioning for the others to follow. Miko was the last to slip inside, just as the creature's claws scraped the entrance. "Now," Zara shouted. In that split second, Van and Miko triggered the trap they had rigged, a set of old alien devices they'd found, positioned just inside the entrance. Sparks flew as the alien machinery roared to life, but it wasn't enough to stop the creature. It was right behind them. "Get back," Dr. Lin yelled, pulling a small device from her pocket. She pressed it against the wall, and a sharp electric hum filled the air. Suddenly, the walls of the chamber pulsed with a violent energy. The alien warrior screeched as the electricity coursed through its body, sending shockwaves of pain through its systems. Zara could see the creature's glowing eyes flicker and dim, its movements becoming slower, more erratic. But the creature wasn't done. With a roar, it charged forward, smashing through the trap, sending sparks flying as the walls began to crack. The team scattered, narrowly avoiding the debris. "We've got to finish this," Zara shouted, adrenaline surging through her veins. The warrior was still standing, even though it was heavily damaged. Its eyes flared up again, and it swung a massive fist toward Zara, but she was ready. With a swift move, she ducked beneath its arm and planted a well-aimed shot right at its chest. The weapon flared to life, piercing the creature's armor. The warrior stumbled back, its form crumpling slightly as the blast disabled its core systems. It growled, but its movements grew more sluggish. Zara didn't stop. She fired again. This time, the alien warrior collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. Silence followed, and for a moment, it felt like the world stood still. Zara's chest heaved, and she glanced around at her team. "We did it," she said breathlessly. "We stopped it." But even as she spoke, she felt a wave of unease settle over her. The creature was only one part of something much larger. They had barely scratched the surface of the war that was coming, and there was no guarantee that they had seen the last of its kind. The team took a moment to catch their breath, but Zara could feel the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them. The diary, the one that had started all of this, had revealed only a fraction of the truth. And now, as they stood in the aftermath of their first battle, Zara knew that their fight was only just beginning. As the lights flickered and the hum of the alien machinery filled the room, Zara looked at her team. "We've won this round, but we've still got a long way to go." The war had begun, and they were caught in its heart. The unexpected revelation. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Zara wiped the sweat from her brow, her heart still racing from the confrontation with the alien warrior. The team stood in the dim light, catching their breath, but Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They had defeated one threat, but the war was far from over. "Zara, we need to keep moving," Van said, his voice urgent. "The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that more of them will come." Zara nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Something about this place, this alien ship, didn't feel right. The walls hummed with an eerie energy, and the floor seemed to pulse beneath their feet. The air itself felt thick, charged with an unnatural force. Zara knew that they weren't just dealing with a military power. They were dealing with something much older, something far more dangerous. "Dr. Lin, any insights?" Zara asked, turning to the scientist, who had been scanning the walls with a device she had pulled from her bag. Dr. Lin's brow furrowed as she studied the readings on her device. "There's something beneath the surface. This ship, it's not just a vessel. It's a weapon, Zara. A living weapon." The word sent a chill down Zora's spine. A living weapon. What did that mean? Before she could ask further, the sound of distant footsteps reached their ears. It was too late to retreat now. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. "Let's go. Stick together," Zara ordered, her voice sharp. The team moved cautiously through the ship's narrow corridors, their senses heightened. The glowing walls seemed to shift as they passed, the architecture changing subtly as if the ship itself was alive, responding to their presence. After a tense walk, they arrived at a large chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and in the center of the room stood a massive console, its surface covered in an array of glowing buttons and screens. It looked almost like a command center, but the technology was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The console pulsed with energy, casting an eerie green glow across the room. "This must be it," Dr. Lin said, her voice filled with awe and apprehension. "This is the core of the ship." Zora approached the console, her fingers hovering over the strange controls. She felt a strange pull, as if the console was calling to her. Her instincts told her to be cautious, but the pull was undeniable. "I'm going to try something," Dr. Lin said, stepping forward. She had a look of determination on her face. "If I can interface with the system, I might be able to access the ship's data, find out what it really is and why it's here." Before anyone could stop her, Dr. Lin placed her hand on the console. The moment she made contact, the ship seemed to come alive. The hum in the air grew louder, the walls pulsing with a brighter energy. Zara felt the temperature drop as if the very atmosphere had changed. It was as if the ship itself was aware of their presence, and it didn't like it. "Dr. Lin, stop," Zara shouted, but it was too late. The console flickered, and then a series of holographic images materialized in the air before them. The images showed a vast, starry sky, filled with ships and strange creatures. Zara's eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. "This is not just a ship," Dr. Lin whispered in disbelief. "It's part of a fleet of living ships." The images shifted, showing the ships in battle, their alien inhabitants fighting against something much darker. Zara's stomach tightened as the images revealed more. The ships were part of an ancient war, a war that had been fought across the galaxy, a war that had nearly wiped out all life. And then, the truth hit Zara like a freight train. These ships, they're not from any known civilization, Dr. Lin said, her voice shaking. They were created by an ancient, unknown race, a race that was so powerful they could bend reality itself. Zara stepped back, her mind reeling. This was far bigger than they had imagined. The war they were fighting was not just between two species. It was part of a much older conflict, one that spanned millennia. The ship they had just encountered was only the tip of the iceberg. "Wait," Zara said, her voice sharp. "You're telling me this ship is from a race that's beyond anything we've encountered?" Dr. Lin nodded grimly. "Yes, and they've been in hibernation for thousands of years, until now." The room seemed to grow colder as the implications of Dr. Lin's words settled in. The alien warriors they had faced weren't just soldiers. They were part of a vast, ancient army. And that army had been awakened. Zara's mind raced. If the creatures they had faced were just the beginning, then what else could be lurking in the depths of the ship? And why had this race decided to make contact now? Before she could voice her thoughts, the console flickered again, and a new image appeared. This one was different. It was a map, an ancient star chart. Zara's eyes widened as she saw a familiar constellation marked on the map. Earth. The map indicated a clear route, straight to their home planet. This is a map to Earth," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming." The truth had been revealed. The war was not just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the very future of humanity. Zara felt her chest tighten as she turned to her team. "We have to warn Earth. We have to stop them." But even as she spoke, Zara knew that they were already too late. The fleet was already on its way. The battle for Earth. Zara stood in front of the console, her heart pounding in her chest as the map of the alien fleet's route burned into her mind. Earth. The place she had always called home was now directly in the path of an unstoppable force, an ancient war that had spanned millennia. The fate of her planet rested on the next few decisions. "We can't just sit here," Van said, his voice hard. "We need to warn Earth. The sooner, the better." Zara turned to him, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "We don't even know how to stop them. Van, this fleet is unlike anything we've ever faced. If we're going to have any chance, we need more than just warnings. We need a plan." Her mind raced, but she could barely focus. Dr. Lin's voice broke through her thoughts. "Zara, I've been looking at the data from the ship's systems," Dr. Lin said, a sense of urgency in her tone. "These ships, this fleet, it's not just about power. There's something else. The technology they've used to travel across the galaxy, to bend space itself. It's beyond anything we can even comprehend. But I think there's a way we can use it against them." Zara's eyes narrowed. "How? What do you mean?" Dr. Lin stepped forward, her face determined. "If we can access the central core of their fleet, where their main control is, we might be able to send a signal back, disrupt their navigation, or even disable their ships." Zara thought for a moment. It was a slim chance, but it was the only one they had. "All right," she said. "We'll need to find the fleet's main command center. But we don't even know where to start." Before Dr. Lin could respond, a blaring alarm interrupted their conversation. Zara's heart skipped a beat. The ship shook violently, as though something massive had collided with it. She grabbed her communicator. "This is Zara," she said into the device. "What's happening?" "Ma'am," a soldier's voice crackled through the comms. "We've got incoming. The alien fleet has arrived. They're here." Zara's stomach twisted as the realization hit her. The fleet was already at Earth's doorstep. She could already hear the distant rumble of explosions in the atmosphere, the sounds of war, coming from her home planet. "We're out of time," Zara said, turning to her team. We have to move now. We need to get to Earth and stop them before it's too late. The team quickly gathered their equipment and prepared to leave the alien ship. They had no time to waste. As they made their way to the ship's exit, Zora's mind raced. They had come this far, but the real battle was just beginning. When they finally emerged from the ship's depths, the sight before them was like nothing they had ever seen. The alien fleet was in orbit, massive ships blotting out the stars, hovering ominously above Earth. The sky was alive with flashes of light as the first waves of attack began. Zara's breath caught in her throat as she watched the destruction unfolding below. "Take us down," Zara ordered, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We're not leaving Earth to them." The ship's engines roared to life, and they descended toward the planet's surface. The closer they got to Earth, the more Zora could feel the tension in the air. The planet was under siege, and humanity was on the verge of its greatest test. As their ship neared the ground, Zora could see the chaos. Buildings crumbling, fires burning, and people running for their lives. The alien warriors had already begun their assault, and it was clear that humanity was struggling to hold them off. Zara clenched her fists. She wasn't going to let this be the end. She had come too far, fought too hard, and she wasn't about to let Earth fall without a fight. When they touched down, the team rushed out of the ship, weapons in hand. The battlefield stretched before them, familiar streets now filled with the sound of explosions and the cries of the wounded. Zara took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. This was the moment. "We find their command center," Zara said firmly, "and we shut it down, no matter what." Her team nodded, ready for the fight of their lives. But as they moved through the war-torn streets, Zora couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into the heart of the enemy. The battle for Earth was only just beginning, and she knew that every decision, every step they took, could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and Zara wasn't about to let the aliens win.